Welcome back to Contacts. We are joined today by Kai Edwards, head women's soccer coach at Southern Utah University and U.S. Youth National Team Scout. Coach, really excited to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. We're excited to get going.
Well, let's dive right in then. So can you take us through your background as a coach? How did you end up in coaching? What was the process for landing your first job and any subsequent jobs that have taken you to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to start, I was lucky and good, and both were necessary and in the right times in the right places. So if I go back when I was 16, 17 years old, I played at Rolling Hills College Preparatory School down in Palos Verdes Estates, was playing club soccer in San Diego for the Nomads, playing basketball, I was doing all this stuff. But at the time I was playing for Coastal Quest, a local club in Torrance. And I showed up for practice. I was born in 1980. So when practice gets canceled, like you would have had to have gone home, checked the answer machine to know. Well, I went to school 25 minutes away from home and my practice was 30. So I didn't go home in between. So I showed up to practice and practice had been canceled. And I looked over and there was a under 18 girls team, so my same age, practicing. And I was like, hey, instead of me going home, can I just jump in and train with you guys for an hour? So I trained with them, and I guess I was naturally like helping, and I'm a smarter coach than I was a good player. And Shelly Martison, who still coaches in the South Bay, the SoCal South Bay, she was like, "Oh, if you want to come back next week," so I came back next week, and then helped with the under 10s and the under 18s while still playing. I was a senior in high school, and then she's like, "Oh, we have the NHB North Huntington Beach tournament this weekend. You want to come and like assistant coach me?" I was like, "Sure." So I sat with her the whole time, and then both teams made it to the finals on Sunday, and they were at the exact same time in different places. So she's like, "You take the 18s, I'll take the 10s." I was like, "Okay." And then the 18s won, and then I kind of stayed in it. And then my freshman year, I went to LA Harbor Community College, and because I was a 17-year-old, didn't play at college, could still play under 18 club, played club, helped out with a team, Palos Verdes Soccer Club. And the coach left, and they raised me from assistant to head coach of this under 12 team. And I always tell people, if you ever want to get in coaching, your first team you ever head coach should have two players that later win a World Cup. So I had Kristen Press on that team and Whitney Ingen, who were both on the 2015 World Cup roster, along with 8 future Division I players. So I just did a good job of not messing it up for a year and a half of coaching them. So I worked with that team, went to San Francisco State to start. Not a huge fan, except for I met my wife there who played volleyball. So was coaching San Francisco Vikings, some local clubs. Then I went to what I call the mecca of coaching, Sonoma State. There's multiple Division I and Division II coaches and club coaches that come out of there. And I got injured my second year, the year we won the national championship, and I was coaching. So our head coach is Marcus Zemer. His brothers all coach in the area, and Chris Zemer was the director of Santa Rosa United at the time. And Chris was like, "Hey, you want to come work with these teams? I got 2 second teams, a 16s and a 14." All right, sure. So I worked with them, and they actually did pretty well. And they're like, "You're actually a better coach than a player." They pretty much told me that with 1 year of eligibility to go. So I finished my last year, and I did my C license, U.S. Soccer C license, and my instructors were Jill Ellis, who at the time was UCLA, soon to be U.S. national team, Greg Ryan, who at the time was the U.S. national team coach, later the University of Michigan coach, where I coached with him, and Mike Haas in Colorado. And they're like, "You got to stay in this, let it out." So I became the volunteer assistant at Western Washington University. The next year, played semi-pro up in Canada because Bellingham, Washington's on the border. And then I really got into coaching. Coached 2 club teams, club director, one of the first coaches to be paid in that county for soccer. Coached a high school team, a middle school team, was driving to Seattle, helping with other teams, coaching an Olympic development program. All I did was coach private trainings. And then I got into ODP regional staff, and this is where the continued luck keeps happening. So I applied for what's called a counselor in training because I was 23 or something, and so they took me, and I show up, and they have these clothes for me. I'm 6'1", well, back then probably 220, not anymore. But so they have these clothes. They're like all smalls and mediums. I was like, what is all this stuff? They're like, hold on, like, wait, you're a Kai? I'm like, yeah, yeah. Like this is before social media, so no one's gonna check who you are. And you could hear him go back and whisper, we thought Kai was a girl. And so they thought they were giving a counselor and training job to a girl. And I'm like, well, I'm here now in 7-day camp. So I had to go to Big Five, go get some Adidas gear because they didn't have any in my size. And so we're at this camp, and Cal South was always the dominant group, and they have Alex Morgan at the time. And Greg Ryan was now there as a U.S. national team coach, who had just had me a year and a half before in our licensing. And he was supposed to run the session with Cal South. And he was like, let Kai run it. I'll watch. And everyone's like, no, we brought the national team head coach here to run the session. He's like, no, let Kai run it. He's good. So I ran the session with Alex Morgan and the crew. Well, 2 years later, I became the head of the region of ODP, of the Western region. And then I had numerous stops. Went back to Sonoma State, was assistant, got the Santa Barbara job, was assistant at Santa Barbara. Then became the head coach at St. Mary's College for 6 years. Contract not renewed, didn't hit the marks that were needed. Restarted, went to Arizona State, was a director of ops for a year, and then a special assistant for a year, non-coaching position, just learned from Kevin Boyd. And I was a director of Sereno Soccer Club, one of the biggest clubs in the country. Then I got the Michigan job, who the coach was now Greg Ryan, the former national team coach. Then he got let go. So then it was restart again. And I became the volunteer assistant at Oakland University and the director of Nationals Development Academy in Michigan. Then Neil called at Cal, volunteer job, which I wasn't going to take, obviously, to move cross country to be a volunteer, but found out that week wife was pregnant and she wanted to have the kid back in California. So we came back, volunteer at Cal, and was coaching director of Walnut Creek Soccer Club, where the head director was Adam Cooper, the guys coach at St. Mary's. So he brought me back in. And then 6 months later, the Southern Utah job opened up, and now signed a long-term contract, bought a house, have a baby, here for a long time. So that's my quick and easy story.
Your resume must be like 15 pages long after hearing that.
Some by choice and some by not.
Yeah. And I would imagine as a result of that, you have had the opportunity, based on your description, to learn from some of the top coaches in the sport, as well as having enough room and permission to do your own thing and learn from your own mistakes and your own successes in a way that now at this stop, you have probably, identified for all intents and purposes what your mission and vision is and what your coaching philosophies are, based on all of that experience.
Yeah, definitely. When my contract wasn't renewed, I basically, I would have liked to be on a 6-month journey, but I was on a 5-year journey of relearning and learning from other people on every level, mid-major to BCS to club to everything, and I immersed myself back in it. I humbled myself real quick in a week. It was like, I'm just going to work. This is my calling. I'm not prepared to do anything else in life. So we're going to find a way. And, obviously you have to have a supportive wife to be able to do all that. But yeah, I went back and was a director of operations and learned operations at a BCS level. And, Kevin Boyd at the time was the winningest coach at Arizona State and Cal at the same time. So to learn from him, and then Greg Ryan, World Cup, Olympics, the guy's done it all. At Michigan, Juan Paul, who's a sports psychologist at Oakland. So you're learning from him. Neil, who's class at Cal, a leader, and, how to manage, between admins and coaches and whatever, I think of it as when I left St. Mary's, I had 2 golf clubs in my bag. Now I'm at 15, and you've learned so much. And now you sit there God, I wish I would have known half of this before.
Yeah. And I can only imagine the different experiences you've had that have led to shaping that approach. And before we jump into my follow-up question on your soccer experience, we also talked before we started recording about how you were actually playing 2 intercollegiate sports at once when you were an undergrad. And I would imagine the, let's call it, failures and disappointments and resilience that's needed in that situation has also informed your coaching journey. But can you give a little bit of background to how you were juggling two interscholastic sports and being a better coach than a player at the same time?
Yeah, so I grew up playing three sports mainly. I played every sport but three main ones: soccer, which I was rec until I was 15 years old, basketball, and if anyone saw the new Shea Cotton um, Netflix or Amazon Prime, so I played with Shea in middle school. So I used to throw alley oops as a seventh grader to two people, DeAndre Walker at San Francisco State and Shea. And then Taekwondo. I've done Taekwondo since I was 4, retired when I was 25, and was on one of the U.S. Taekwondo national teams for 4 years. So I'm shaped by a lot of that. So when I was recruited to play basketball at Riverside, Redlands, Cal Baptist, and LMU. And I ended up going to San Francisco State, just playing soccer, but I would practice with them in the off season and just do double duty because I had nothing else to do. Well, when I went to San Francisco State, I told Rich and Scaldo the same thing. And so they would I would do open gym, summer. Like I knew the guys, so I just would play. And going into my senior year, the backup point guard got hurt. And Kevin Christensen was going to be a freshman, but he was the unknown. So I had already practiced with them. So halfway through my senior year of soccer in about October, they're like, "Hey, do you want to play?" I was like, do I get shoes? And they're like, "Oh yeah, you get free shoes." I'm like, I got no, I don't know what I'm doing after college. So yeah, I'll play. So by rule, I was able to play until the second semester started. Cause I had already graduated in June. So, and we had a Jan term. So I was able to play till January 30th. So I got about 18 games in, started my senior game at Chico, and I was a hustler. So it started off with a tip off and the ball got tipped and I dove into the bench to try to save it, and Rich and Scott, that's what I was known for. I was an awful shooter. I hit a shot versus San Bernardino when we were down by like 80, their Elite 8 year, and Fascaldo and Rich were like cheering on the sideline. It was awesome. But I was a defensive specialist and a pure dribbling, passing point guard. So I was able to do both. And to be honest, my controversial phrase is, burnout comes from when you're not having fun. So I would practice soccer in the morning, basketball in the afternoon, and go to Taekwondo practice at night because I was on the collegiate youth national team for Taekwondo, and I'd do them all every day, and I never burned out one time because it was fun, and it taught you time management, it taught you managing. So in soccer, I'm taller, so I'm expected to be less coordinated. In basketball, I'm short, so I'm expected to be quick and coordinated. So I'm a Libra, so I try to balance myself, and I've always prided myself in knowing a little bit of a lot of things. Yeah. So it's helped me be able to manage different situations and see what the circumstance is, and then figure out how to be successful in the circumstance.
Well, I love that you were able to continue to do that all the way through your college experience, because what seems to be the belief of the day and what is marketed to our current youth through the youth sports industrial complex is that you need to sport specialize. And even though the research doesn't support that in regards to injuries and safety, that's what's being pushed. And so I love the fact that you continue to do those things, because it's the old school model of cross training, of staying healthy. And, it's a great message and example for our kids growing up today. If you don't mind, and you can pick at any point in your long career and different experiences how to answer this question. But what I'm always curious about for our listeners and people that are maybe going into a job for the first time, be it an assistant, be it a head coach, but what are the things, even given your experience, that you realized very quickly you needed to figure out when you got that first head job or you got that new assistant job, but you thought you had the answers and all of a sudden you got hit like a ton of bricks that you didn't know what you were doing?
Managing assistants and admins. So I was told very clearly, like, I love soccer, I live soccer, and I think about it every day, but everyone working around your program isn't you. So, contacting the SID at 1 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday on email, wondering, like, can you do something like that? Just because you're thinking about it doesn't mean they are. So learning to give space and balance to support staff was huge. Because I mean, I can wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and talk soccer, but it was important to learn that. And it took me 6 years to learn that part. And to be honest, I think one of the mistakes I made was I was always taught to hire what you're not, right? And I almost went overboard and hired someone so opposite that there was zero symmetry. And we had a clunky relationship in my first two, where when I hired Missy Strasberg at St. Mary's, who's now the assistant at Air Force, we had similar values with different views, which was perfect because she would walk in, shut the door, we'd have an argument, we'd sort it out, we'd walk out, and every girl thought we were the best friends in the world, which we still are to this day. But I kind of taught myself, I hired someone I didn't know from Georgia to get, national, whatever. I'm like, I didn't need to be that opposite. I just need someone that I trusted and they trusted their own information to, when there was a dissenting idea, that they would bring it to you. I didn't need to have someone just opposite, so which creates clunkiness. And then at St. Mary's, you're dealing with a $65,000 school. At the time, the conference was number 2 to 5 conference in the country, behind the ACC and the Pac-12. So like the budget was a lot. Like it was all earmarked for something, but it was just a lot more money than I've ever had to make sure it ends at 0 on June 31st ever. So like that kept me up at night, double checking, like, okay, like, what do you mean they upgrade it from medium to large at Outback? Like, that's $2 more. Like, school's going to be on me in July 1st if we go over. So learning to sweat the big stuff or the little stuff, and kind of managing more, spending more times on managing than the soccer sometimes.
Really appreciate that answer, because you're the first person in 28 episodes of this that brought up budgets. And it's not something when you're going into a coaching job, or even me in the athletic director role, where it's front of mind. It's something that takes up a large majority of your bandwidth, but it's often an afterthought for us initially, because we're thinking, in your case, soccer, in my case, basketball strategy, what are we going to do? And it's like, whoa, no, you got to manage this budget. You got to make sure everything works out. And it's really good that you brought that up. So for the listeners, hey, this is also part of your job. And if you mess this thing up, then you don't have a job anymore. So make sure you get this part right. It's
one of the biggest ones that, like you said, is not talked about, but arguably, like, if you lose a game, there's an issue. Right. You go over budget by a lot, there's a massive issue. So, it's hard enough to manage your own personal money that you earn. So it's even harder to manage something someone gives you. Right. And it's funny, like, my mom was an accounts manager at Kaiser. So I was taught how to balance checkbook when I was like 6. So, and I wasn't allowed to use a credit card. My mom's like, we don't spend money we don't have. So like, I was always thought, like, this is how you do it. So last year I coached a high school team while working at Cal, Monte Vista High School boys in Danville. And I walk in, and very well-funded high school program. And he's like, here's the budget. I'm like, oh yeah, I found the numbers online on a board meeting from last year. I've put it in a spreadsheet, equals out, we're going to do this. And he's like, you're the first coach ever. Like, even, I'm like, well, you don't go over budget. He goes, I know, but like, I usually have to explain that to the coach. And I mean, we had a budget that it's hard to go over, to be honest. And I was like, oh, and I saved you $4,000 here, and we're going to do this. And he was like, thank you. Can you give a speech to the other staff?
That is such a valuable skill that people, I wouldn't say need to learn, but need to understand that you earn a lot of social capital when you take care of that and you stay under budget, or you save the school money that they can repurpose elsewhere, that it's not talked about enough, as you mentioned. So I love that you brought it up. Thank you for doing that. It's really valuable information. If we think about your program now, and no joke, you just rattled off the longest resume I've heard on one of these things. So you have a lot to draw from here. But however many years in that you are, however many different programs, I couldn't keep track. But is there, let me reset. What is the best thing you do in your program that you've either stolen, acquired, developed over the years that has followed, stop to stop, because it's that important in regards to creating a ripple effect in your program and its culture? What's the best thing you do?
Yeah, and I think that's always tested by what would your players say, and
Mm-hmm.
what would your past players say.
Right.
And I think I would say problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing I was taught, as a kid. My parents would look at me and be like, solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
In Taekwondo, I remember being in the US Open, and I fought the number 2 guy in the world from South Korea, who was 6'6", and my master looked at me and was like, then don't do it that way. Do it another way. I was like, got it. So I try to instill in my players is soccer, life, whatever, every moment is a problem. Solve the problem, and there's many ways to solve the problem. Your past experience, dumb luck, ask for advice, trial and error, but do not give up. Find the solution, and Cruyff, Johan Cruyff, a Dutch superstar, one of the best ever, one of his quotes is, every disadvantage has its advantages. So looking at what is the actual advantage in the situation, we're in Cedar City. It's a small town. Like, no one's heard of us. Well, what's our advantage? It's a small town. If I want a meeting in 5 minutes, they can all get there. The community supports us. I wear a red T-bird shirt to Applebee's. I might get a steak for free. Like, so what is your advantage, and not always figuring out what is your issue. So finding the advantage in every disadvantage, which takes knowledge of situation, and then solving problems. Every program I had, like, we played BYU when I was at St. Mary's, number 8 in the country, and I'm like, solve the problem. Yes, Ashley Hatch, All-American, future national team player. Well, don't stand close to her if she's going to spin you every time. Like, solve, trial and error, find a new solution. So I would say that's probably the number one thing, is find a solution to whatever problem. Identify problems, solve the problem.
Yeah, and that's more of a mindset teaching point, right? Even using COVID as an example, I ask people all the time when they're, hey, how are things going? Great. Dominating every day. Finding the COVID wins. They're all around you if you look for them. This podcast is one of them, right? We got time on our hands. Let's get together and let's try to produce mentorship for people that might not have that. So I love that approach. How are there specific things you do to teach that to your players other than banging that drum vocally?
Yeah, I think number one is creating an environment that creates problems, and then facilitating the solutions. So I think everything from, I used to do camps with Julie Foudy leadership camps. And one of the things she would say, and Colleen Hacker, the ex-US women's national team, sports psychologist who works up at PLU in Washington, silence is a golden tool that coaches don't use enough. Where we answer a question, or we ask a question, and in 4 seconds, if they haven't answered it, we solve it for them. So I've gotten much better at, hey, I'm in no rush. I'll wait. And you've given them a problem, don't solve it so quickly. So facilitating that by creating issues. Sometimes I'll make a drill that is impossible for one side, and see, maybe I think it's impossible, but someone finds a solution. We'll play team bonding and exercises where we'll say, like, here are the rules. Pop, pop, pop. And of course, one person's gonna be like, well, can we do this? And I'll just repeat, here are the rules. Pop, pop, pop. And like the kids who like know to solve the problem, they're like, dude, stop asking. You're letting the other team know they can do it. So I think it's continually to put them in problem solving situations, but then facilitating it and applauding it when you're like, hey, so in the end, did I actually help you, or did you solve your own problem? I just sat here, so I think it's huge.
Well, in the lesson you're teaching your athletes, and I would imagine this presents itself inside your own home as well. So your children is, you can figure this out. Yes, you may need a little bit of help, but you need to trust your own ability to extricate yourself from this perceived unsolvable problem. And I think that's a great approach. It's something that we need to be more confident allowing that type of failure and setting those things up so that, we don't have to be the center of whatever it is. It's let the kids work it out. They're the ones playing the game anyway. So love that approach. I'm sure
my kid just turned 1,
Mhm.
and I look at even my kid, and like, you stand in her way and she'll look to the left, look to the right, and then she'll move your legs and crawl below. I'm like, you solved the problem.
Yeah.
Like, like even that little stuff where, and we have this little desk that's a little high for her. And if you put something on it now, she'll put her hands on it and shake it, because she knows if she shakes it, it will move what's on it closer to her. And I'm like, dude, the kid's solving problems already at the age of 1.
Yeah. No, I think we often as coaches and teachers do, I wouldn't say more harm than good, but we often will condition our students and our athletes to become almost robotic, where they stop seeking that solution on their own. And I remember a time when I was at another school, and I had just gotten there, and I was teaching religion, which was more of like a social justice and morality class. And I would show these video clips and just ask kids, hey, just free write a response to that. Coach, what do you want us to write? I just, whatever's front of mind, just write and respond. Yeah, but coach, what do you want me to write? Because they were like seeking some sort of outcome, and it was like, I just want you to process and respond. And it was a really interesting lens into the conditioning that had happened into them seeking what was right. It's like, no, this is just developing your mind here. So I think we ought to be careful of that, and your approach really probably adds value to teaching that skill set. As you have gone from stop to stop, and even there in Cedar City, which is a small town, and we were just talking about how the football coach Demario Warren's episode is going to release soon. I would imagine you have contact. You can go watch other teams. You have experience in all these other organizations you work for with soccer per se, but I'm always curious, especially with coaches that have a background as multi-sport athletes, but what have you been able to take, borrow, steal, whatever words you want to put on it, from watching not just other coaches, but other sports, practice, train, game, that you have taken directly and used it in soccer?
Yeah. So if we train out we have our own soccer field, but if we train on the turf because of weather, football's usually after us, and we'll hang out for a little bit and watch. And like, one thing they do a lot is small, big, small, so they'll be in their position groups, and then they'll go offense versus defense big, and then they go back to their position groups, where a lot of soccer usually goes small, small, big, and ends with the bigger game, and I still think for soccer, the bigger game is the best to end. But I think with anything, there's nothing wrong with mixing it up. So I've done a couple, small functional groups. Okay, let's play 9v9 for a bit, 11v11, then let's break it back down to small, where in soccer we go back to small the next day. So you're are revisiting 24 hours later, instead of, hey, let's now go back to small and talk about what we just did in the big in the same training. So I like, that's something I've taken from them. Basketball, which I'm not a huge fan of, does a lot of unopposed exercises of shooting, walkthroughs, like a lot of rehearsed activities. So I think that's good for individual sessions, but I don't like it in a group setting. But I would say, and I was actually just thinking about this, I think we have 15 sports on campus. Only 4 of them are contact sports. The other 10, I would dare to call isolated technique sports, right? So we have football, us, and both basketballs are the only ones that a lot of their decision on the court, on the field, has to do with the opponent. Where gymnastics, they're going against a judge.
Right.
Golf, they're self in a judge, in the scoreboard. Track, I mean, you're running against them, but they're not influencing you. You're going as hard as you can.
Yeah.
What else do we have? Softball, I can't remember what else. So a lot of our sports are isolated skill sports.
Right.
So it's very interesting walking around campus
Mm-hmm.
where you're like, well, that doesn't translate. But then it's, okay, wait, don't be stubborn. What does translate?
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, well, we could do this. Well, I mean, I wouldn't take all of this, but okay, I like how softball does pitchers over here at 3:00 and then
Mm-hmm.
outfield at 4. But,
Mm-hmm.
is it better to run both our defense and attack at 3:00, or should we split them 3 and 4 so they have more space and they're not influenced by other things on the field? So looking at, I'm big on cadences, seeing what other coaches' cadences are, sizes, physical proximity and grouping. So, soccer is very big on functional spaces. So if you're going to train the midfielders, train them in the middle of the field, defenders train in the back, where football, they don't have that luxury at a school that has one football field.
Right.
At Michigan, we have like 4 fields, so they can go all over. Where at Cedar, that your wide receivers might be in the end zone already, but working on something else, so you're like, okay, like when I do have this, how do I adjust to things like that? So yeah, but I sit and watch a lot of basketball practices, partly because it's indoors, so I can bring my 1-year-old. But I kind of watch how, they'll have a 20-minute shell drill of drilling in the final moment, and they're bigger on what's not positional game, like momentary games, right? Last 30 seconds, 5 seconds on the clock. So kind of look at, and all those to me are like a soccer set piece. And they drill that stuff where soccer coaches not always drill set plays. So I try to take a little from a lot of those guys.
Yeah, I love the example that you used with softball as far as scaffolding their training and how, well, maybe we can do this, because what it does is it points out, visualize what they're doing from a different lens. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter. It's just the concept of, hey, they scaffolded start times to get more reps. Is that usable, right? And I think that's really important. I think even what you just described with basketball, where they're drilling set pieces and going over play sets, where your sport doesn't function the same way. It's much more free flowing than there's no point in training it that way, possibly, but what can you take from that, right? And how do you apply that concept is really important for anybody that's thinking about looking and watching other sports train. How has your coaching approach changed during your career?
A lot more mellow.
I hear that all the time.
Everything set me off when I was younger. Didn't matter what it was. If the eggs weren't done right in the pregame meal, I snapped about something. So I've got a lot more chill about things. I'm still a very big attention to detail. I just choose which details matter more than others. I let my assistants do a lot more. I didn't let my assistants do anything my first 3 years. I was like, I finally got here. I'm doing it all. And then I was like burned out, dripping sweat. Like, I'm like, I don't need to be the person who double checks the time with the strength and conditioning coach. Like, someone else can do that. Someone else can get the time from the visiting team on when they're arriving. So I became much more branch out, but like every single thing was life or death for me for my first probably 14 years of coaching. It didn't matter. Like, I was like, hold on, we wore red last Friday and we lost 2-1. And like, I remember once I always got a Subway sandwich before every game at home, 6 inches. And all my assistants got to crack up. 6 inches Italian sub, 1 strip of mayo, 1 strip of Dijon, 3 tomatoes, 3 pickles, couple onions, because you tell them a little, and what's a little, you tell them. So I said 1 strip, one. So one time it wasn't right, and I sent it back. I was like, make it again, dude. Make it again. Like, I can't do it. And then I'd get a chai with an add shot of espresso, and if I didn't have that exact thing, like, I'm like sweating before a game. I had it 3 hours before every game for 4.5 years. So like that stuff, I mean, I'm still superstitious, but I've kind of let some of that stuff go because it's just not healthy. Like I'm like the guy in the subway line. Like there's 8 people in front of me. I'm like, I have to get it at 11:58. Like, can you let me go ahead of you? Like, what are you doing? So I've let a lot of that stuff go, which has been happier. And with the players a little bit also. Like I've had a couple players, Hannah Diaz, who plays in France, played for me at St. Mary's. She gave a speech to our players a couple of weeks ago, and she said something, and she's like, and then he probably hammered you on this, and they're like, what? She's like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, I'm sure you guys have to do this and this, and they're like, no. She's like, dude, you're soft. And she said it in the middle of the Zoom, and then she's like, oh, you guys better soak this up, dude.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I don't care about that part anymore.
That is the repeated mantra of those of us that have done this job for a longer period of time. It's like, for the most part, we've mellowed out. We still pay attention to the things that are non-negotiables, and a lot of things that used to be non-negotiables, that's not the hill we're going to die on anymore. And it's both, in my experience, and probably listening to you and yours, created a much greater sense of relief, balance, enjoyment amongst all of the stakeholders. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm the police anymore. I'll still remember my first head coach, or one of my first head coaches meetings at St. Mary's, and we all had to turn in our team handbook, our rule book. And Rob Browning, the volleyball coach, goes, I'm going to guess Kai's is the longest. I'm like, what? And he's like, the new guy is always the longest. So I bust mine out. It's like 22 pages, like what to wear into the training room, what to wear to hotel breakfast, like to a T. And he's like, every year you're going to take off like 4 pages. Trust me. 100%. And now my rule book is the same as his is, which is our standard is this: respect yourself, respect your program, respect your university. Sign here. Yeah. And everything falls under that. And it's 1 page now.
I think every one of us would say exactly what you just said. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but yeah, mine is 1 page. It's about 6 bullet points, and it's all to what you just said. It is standards and guidelines, because the more rules you have, the more you have to police it. You keep it simple, and the reality of the world, that the response is always, it depends anyway, because you don't know the context of any given situation. It just makes life easier for everyone.
And my quick story on where I was taught that was, I used to have the test. You have to pass fitness test day 1 to play in a game. Well, what I did not account for was Cassie Lynch, absolute warrior from Sacramento, who ended up playing pro. She hit an ankle injury from me, passed the test, and then was out for 3 weeks and missed the first game anyway. Mm-hmm. And then Carolyn Bolin lands, she's French-Canadian from Quebec, lands, someone gets hurt in the Canadian U20 national team. She gets called into Japan to go to the World Cup. So she misses our first 3 weeks, comes back, and now because of that rule, we play at Texas A&M, and I can't play her in the first half because I made the rule. I'm like, well, the rule wasn't made for a kid who's playing international World Cup games. And I was like, rules are gone. Yep. Rules are gone.
Too bad, coach. You got to live it out. All right. So on that note, this is something new that I've been trying to mix in. I stole this from Tim Ferriss, but do you have a favorite failure that you have leaned on throughout your coaching career that has helped you adjust and grow?
Oh, I have an on the field one.
Perfect.
And year 1, playing against my mentor, Jerry Smith, one of the winningest coaches of all time. Their team's number 8 in the country. And we're playing straight up with them. And I think we were up 1-0 at halftime. And he changes formations. He's starting a 4-3-3, and he changed to 5 in the back, 3 in the midfield, 2 up top, so his outside backs would go. And I saw it, and immediately I was like, switch, 4-2-4, take care of their outside backs, 2v3 in the middle, counter through them, and we've absorbed it. Well, I didn't change because I was like, don't overcoach, don't coach yourself out of this game. Well, we go into overtime. He wins on a PK in overtime. We go out to dinner. I'm like, hey, like, let me run this by you. So I was going to do that. He's like, oh, you should have. That would have been a perfect move. I was like, and he's like, why didn't you do it? I was like, I just didn't want to overcoach. And he goes, no, overcoaching is when you make bad decisions. That was the right call.
Yeah.
I was like, well, instead, it's not a good story that we tied or beat the number 9 team in the country. It's a footnote that we lost on a penalty kick in overtime. So like that made me, and at the time I didn't trust one of my assistants, my head assistant. And so I made that full decision on my own. Mm-hmm. Where now I'd be like, hey, let me run this by you. Like, what do you think real quick? Let's make this decision. So that has made me hire assistants I trust in that moment more, mm-hmm. Which I think would have won us the game. And just been confident in myself. I'm confident in my preparation because I felt he was going to do that. So I was prepared for it, mm-hmm. but I wasn't prepared to make the decision because I'm like, well, if you do that and then you lose by 4 and we had pretty good press, then in the news and the press, they're saying, I'm like, have confidence to deal with wins and losses.
Yep, absolutely. Great story. I appreciate you sharing that. What would you say is the thing that you most recently have changed your mind on from a coaching standpoint?
Oh, scheduling.
Interesting. Take us through that.
I used to think you had to play the biggest and best ever every single time. It's that I'm from San Pedro. I had that chip in the shoulder. We're blue collar. We're from the docks of LA. So you always have this, I'm a Division II guy. So you're like, whatever, I'll play anybody, any day. And I did. I remember one year we had Texas A&M, Colorado. They were in the Big 12. Stanford, Cal, all, with Little St. Mary's.
And people were calling, hey, call Kai. He'll say yes.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, we'll give you a guarantee. Sure. They're like, come on over. And I'm like, whatever, any day. So yeah. I think the understanding of balance and scheduling. Right. I now spend every Monday and Wednesday usually an hour minimum on scheduling all the way out, double checking practice schedules, game schedules, times, flights, travel, because I've seen the importance of accidentally putting 5 back-to-back away games. Mm-hmm. Like one year it wasn't supposed to be this way, but everyone had a run the year before, and I ended up at San Diego State, who was number 2 in the RPI, at Colorado, who was 8. Denver was coming off a miracle year. They were number 15. Marquette was 12. Loyola Chicago. Stanford was 1, and Cal was 14. That was my first 7 games, all on the road. I was like, what the? Like, I mean, we were better, but we were wanted.
Yeah, no, that is, I'm glad you've changed your mind on that because. Yeah.
So finding that balance, mm-hmm. in our sport, we carry bigger rosters. So if you play a schedule where you can't go deep in your roster, you start to create animosity on your own team. Yeah. So having a balance where you're like, okay, I know I'm going to be able to get 20 players in this game. In this game, I'm probably, we play BYU, it's probably 13 to 14, but in the next 8 days, I need to schedule a game where I can get 16 to 20 in. So, I think the attention, the detail in scheduling, I think has been my biggest education and change.
Yeah, I love that answer. I was very fortunate that in my first head job, my athletic director and mentor was also the women's basketball coach. So I was able to get very specific coaching on that. And he always framed it for me this way, and I've used it forever. If you're a basketball coach and you play 3 tournaments, you want to play one where you can go 3-0. You want to play one where you'll probably go 0-3, and you want to play one that's a toss-up. And that way you finish right around 500, but you get the opportunity to play some really good teams and you get the opportunity to build some confidence. And so I think your answer speaks to that exact point.
Definitely.
Last question.
Yep.
And since we are relatively the same age, we will use the Back to the Future DeLorean reference. If you could jump in the DeLorean and go back to the beginning, what advice would you invite your younger self to consider?
I'll first put the caveat, but then I'll answer the question. I regret nothing. So, because
Perfect. Yeah.
that's how I've learned and grown. But
That's what shapes us.
yeah,
And what I'm always interested in, more not for you than for the listeners, it's, hey, psst, here's the keys to the test. And all those experiences are going to shape you, but this is going to make it a little bit easier.
ask more open-ended questions, not direct questions. So I would ask such direct questions like, hey, would you play 4-4-2 versus Stanford? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, then someone's going to say yes or no.
Right.
Instead of saying, hey, you've seen my team. What are some ideas that you think we should be considering when we play Stanford next week? Mm-hmm. So asking more open-ended questions rather than when you ask a direct question, you are leading like a lawyer and putting your opinion where you're pigeonholing the answer. So I remember asking like, well, how many would you travel? Would you travel 20 or 22 on the road for this game? Would you, would you travel 4 or 5 strikers? Instead of saying, here's the context. This school, we're on the road, altitude or non-altitude, heat or none, I have this budget. What are some things, I don't even want your answer. What are some things you would consider if you were me? And I think if I would have asked more open-ended questions, I would have informed myself better because I would be tapping in. It's like a standardized test. Yeah. I was asking a standardized test question to get a standardized answer instead of asking a liberal arts question to, I'm talking to Becky Burley from Florida with 400 wins and Anson from North Carolina. I'm like, hey, 3-4-3 or 4-3-3. And they're like 3-4-3. I'm like, all right, good chat. Instead of tapping in to give me the information you have, instead of me tell you if you agree with my information or not.
Yeah. I love that answer. It's such a good way to think about how you accumulate knowledge. And my good buddy has an answer that he uses all the time. Whenever somebody asks him an or question, he just says yes. Yeah. It's like, hey, yes. It might not be that. Embrace the power of and. There's a way to look at this from multiple sides.
Definitely. Yeah. I look back now, I'm like, I asked questions but never got answers.
Yeah.
For my first 6 years. And I spent time on asking those questions. Right. I spent time preparing those questions, but in the end, I didn't get real answers. Yeah. I got the answer either I wanted to hear or not wanted to hear, but they only had 2 options. And when you do that, you're limiting the actual resource you're trying to get.
Yeah. And I think it's hard for young coaches because there's almost this sense of imposition when you are seeking out that knowledge, whereas most of us have found out that if you're sincere and authentic and not trying to leverage it into something else, you're just really curious. There's not a whole lot of people that aren't going to invest in you for asking a question. Hey, what did you just write down there? Why do you do it that way? Right? It's a very good way to get information.
Well, and I think it's, especially when you're younger and even when you're older, you want to give the question so direct, so you're seeing if your answer is validated. Right. Or not. And one way I told a coach a couple of weeks ago, actually, I said, well, if you want that validation, this is how you do it. Mm-hmm. The question you have, write your answer down. Mm-hmm. Ask an open-ended question so you get the information back. Do not run your idea off that person because you're insulting the fact that you asked them. Mm-hmm. Have someone else to go talk to. Mm-hmm. And then you ask them the direct question. Yeah. Right? So I would be like, Jerry, hey, let me get this information, and then I'd go talk to Marcus Zemer and be like, hey, I got this from Jerry. This was my idea. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on the 2? So now you're not insulting and wasting the time of the person you were asking for their professional opinion, but you're still also trying to find your almost validation. Am I thinking in the right way without burning bridges?
Yeah, and it's to that point, and we'll wrap up here. As a younger coach, be it age or experience, doesn't really matter. It's an ego thing. It's a confidence thing. And once you get past that barrier of just being irrationally confident or you're over your fear of failure, you don't care anymore. You just ask. And I think one more piggyback on your point, it's the same in leadership. If you go into a room of assistant coaches and you say, hey, what should we do against the game tomorrow? Here's what I'm thinking. You have now just privileged your opinion over any of theirs, because they're going to either agree with you, or you're going to have somebody that's really big on dissenting opinion. You're almost better just to ask and be silent, like you referenced earlier. Let them put stuff onto the table, and then you process in your own way and circle back to, okay, here's what we're going to do.
So it's interesting you say that. So my undergrad degree was in American multicultural studies,
Okay.
sociology, right?
Yep.
The study of cultures and thoughts and whatever.
Yep.
And then I just got my master's in coaching pedagogy from Ohio University. So trying to marry the two, like with my staff, there's that question of how do you ask a question without leading? Mm-hmm. So, and I have a very emotional face. So I try to do it in text and email, so there's no leading. Mm-hmm. And we start training up again in a couple weeks. And so I sent an email to the 3 assistants and said, do not talk about it, and answer an email form back to me separate. We have 5 days to start preseason coming up. What do you think is important in attacking, defending, transition, team mentality? And what would you do in those sessions for these 5 days? So they all answer back, super detailed, some similar, some different. And then all I responded was thanks. Mm-hmm. And then my top assistant, Mario, was like, well, like what was your idea? I'm like, oh, I hadn't written anything down yet. Like I wrote something down a month ago, right. But it wasn't, I just wanted to see. Mm-hmm. And I added some of their ideas and took out, and he was, he wants to get after it, right? And he's like, was I right?
See?
and I was like, well, it wasn't really a right or wrong. And he's like, well, can you send me what you wrote down? I was like, yeah. I'll send you what I did. I did it a month ago. Yeah. So I sent it. He's like, oh, I didn't know you wanted that much detail. And I'm like, I didn't. I just wanted, you were the head coach. Yeah. What were you going to do? And I'm going to take some of your ideas and marry them. But, and I was actually proud of myself the way I did it, because I got like 3 different views of how they answered the question. But I also had my answer written down of, okay, there's got to be a good reason for me to eliminate some of the things we're going to do. And a couple of them like, oh, I can do that. All right. Done with this on Tuesday. We're going to do what Mario was going to do on Tuesday. Done. But I never even told him afterwards, like, I like it or not. I was like, I redid my whole training of the whole thing, and I sent it to him. I was like, this is what we're doing the first week. And I'm sure, like, if I was them, I'd be like, hold on, I think one of these are my idea.
Exactly.
Like secretly excited type thing. So it was, I try to do that as often as possible, because I do have a younger impersonal staff. So in-person meeting, like, hey, and I have to do a better job of cultivating it of, hey, what's your opinion? Well, if one of them hears other opinions, they're going to think they have to answer similar to them. Yeah. But when I have them emotionless separated, I get unfiltered answers, and they know. I'm like, you can't insult me. Like, well, say what you want to say.
And that's the lesson. How do you get information that's authentic without it needing to be right? And then you have to make those decisions. And I love that exercise. That's something I'll probably steal and implement moving forward. Coach, really appreciate you taking the time. This has been awesome. Probably going to be a independent round 2 when we have time to get together again.
Love it. Thank you. I appreciate it. And go T-Birds.